It was a late evening when I decided to run down to the store for a few things. The air was cool, and the street was lit by yellow lamps that made the pavement glow in uneven patches. I wasn't thinking about anything special, just groceries and heading back home. When I came out of the store with 2 paper bags in my hands, I noticed something odd. 2 tiny shapes were moving in the shadows near the entrance. At first, I thought it was just a pair of stray kittens. They kept their distance but followed me as I walked across the parking lot. I stopped, turned around, and they froze. Their little bodies looked thin, and they were hesitating, as if unsure whether to come closer or run away. Their eyes reflected the light, big and searching. Something about the way they moved made me pause. They didn't dart around like cats usually do. Instead, they crept forward with careful, almost silent steps. I walked another 10 feet, and sure enough, they were right behind me again, keeping just enough space to feel safe. I could tell they were hungry. Their tiny heads were low, their tails stiff, and their attention stayed fixed on the grocery bags I was carrying. I felt a strange pull of responsibility, even though I had no idea where they had come from. I put my bags down, crouched, and stretched out a hand, but they didn't move any closer. They just stood there, ears twitching, eyes locked on me. I decided to head back inside the store. Leaving them there didn't feel right. I placed my groceries in the trunk of my car and walked quickly back to the entrance. Inside, I picked up a few packets of wet cat food and asked the cashier for a disposable bowl. She gave me a curious look but didn't say much. When I stepped back outside, the 2 little ones were still waiting, huddled close together near the bushes. It was like they knew I was coming back for them. I tore open the packets, squeezed the food into the bowl, and placed it a few feet away from them. At first, they hesitated. Then, as if on some silent signal, both of them rushed forward and buried their faces in the food. They devoured it so quickly that it made me wonder when they had last eaten. Their bodies shook slightly as they licked the bowl clean, and I couldn't look away. For a moment, all I felt was relief that they had something in their stomachs. As they finished, they looked up at me again. There was no meowing, no sound at all, just those round, intent eyes staring at me, as if waiting for my next move. That silence was unusual, but at the time I brushed it off. I just thought maybe they were too weak to cry. I sighed, gathered the empty packets, and glanced at the 2 of them. They weren't moving away. Instead, they slowly followed me as I picked up my groceries again. I walked toward my building, and with every few steps, I could hear the soft padding of their paws on the pavement. They were sticking with me like glue, never rushing ahead, never lagging behind too far. By the time I reached the stairwell, I already knew I couldn't leave them outside. The night air was getting colder, and the thought of them huddling together on the concrete made my chest tighten. So I opened the door and let them in. They walked into the hallway, hesitant but curious, their small bodies stiff with caution. I closed the door behind us, placed the groceries down, and watched them sniff around. Their coats were a bit rough, but the markings on their fur stood out even under the dim light. They had spots, dark, irregular ones scattered across their backs and sides. And their ears had tiny tufts of black hair sticking out at the tips. I noticed it, but I didn't think much about it right then. To me, they were just 2 unlucky kittens who needed shelter for the night. I picked up a blanket from the couch, folded it into a soft pile on the floor, and placed the empty bowl nearby, promising myself I'd buy more food tomorrow. They curled up together almost immediately, side by side, their breathing slow and steady. I stood there for a while, just watching them. Something about their presence in my apartment felt strange, but also right, as if this encounter wasn't random. I had no way of knowing what I had actually brought into my home. For now, all I saw were 2 small, spotted kittens that had chosen me to follow. And even though those ears and those markings were unlike any kittens I had ever seen, I told myself it was nothing. Tomorrow, I thought, I'd get a better look in daylight. When I woke up the next morning, the first thing I noticed was the silence. I stepped into the hallway and found the 2 little ones curled up on the blanket where I had left them. They looked peaceful, but the moment I moved closer, their heads shot up in perfect sync. Their eyes locked on me, sharp and alert, as if I were a stranger intruding on their space. It wasn't the soft, sleepy reaction I had expected from kittens. Their bodies were tense, their ears angled forward, ready for any sudden move. I decided to set up a proper place for them. Carrying the blanket and the empty bowl, I led them to the small balcony at the end of the apartment. It was enclosed with glass, safe from the wind, and bright with morning light. I spread the blanket in one corner and set out 2 bowls, one with water, the other with some dry food I had left over from when I occasionally fed strays near the building. They approached carefully, sniffing at everything like it was brand new territory. Their movements caught my attention. They didn't shuffle about clumsily like house kittens. Instead, every step was deliberate, quiet, and precise. Their paws pressed the floor softly, and when one turned its head, the other instantly mirrored the gesture. It gave me an odd feeling, like watching 2 little predators rather than helpless babies. I left them to eat and went to make myself coffee. The sound of crunching kibble followed me into the kitchen, steady and urgent. After a while, I peeked back in. They had finished nearly everything and were now crouched low, side by side, staring at the glass. Their tails twitched, and their ears flicked toward the faint noises outside. It was as if the world beyond the glass held more interest than anything I could offer. Later that day, I stepped out to throw away some trash. Just as I opened the door, my neighbor from across the hall came out. Mrs. Peterson was in her 60s, always carrying gossip in one hand and a shopping bag in the other. She noticed the faint movement behind my door and asked, "What have you got in there? Did you finally get yourself some pets?" I hesitated. "Just a couple of kittens I found outside," I said, trying to sound casual. She leaned forward, peeking past my shoulder. The 2 little ones were sitting just inside the hallway, their spotted coats visible even from a distance. Mrs. Peterson raised an eyebrow. "Those don't look like any kittens I've ever seen," she muttered. "Where did you find them?" "Near the store," I replied quickly. "They followed me home." She gave me a skeptical look, but didn't press further. "Well, you'd better be careful. Wild animals are nothing to play with." And with that, she turned and shuffled off toward the stairs. Her words stuck with me. I went back inside and closed the door firmly. For the first time, I really looked at them. Their ears had those little black tufts, and the spots on their coats seemed bolder in the daylight. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe they were just some unusual breed of house cat. But the doubt had already taken root. The rest of the evening, I kept them close. They napped in their corner, waking occasionally to watch every move I made. If I dropped something or walked too fast, their heads jerked up, bodies instantly alert. It wasn't the lazy comfort I remembered from other kittens. These 2 carried themselves with a sharpness that felt out of place in an apartment. When night finally came, I stretched out on the couch with a book, trying to ignore the unease building in me. The apartment was quiet, except for the occasional shifting sounds from the balcony where they slept. Around midnight, I turned off the lights and let the silence settle. That's when I heard it. Not a meow, not a soft purr, but a low, throaty sound. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make me sit upright. It came again, rougher this time, like a growl forced out of a small chest. The sound didn't belong to any kitten I had ever heard. It echoed faintly through the hallway, mixing with the creak of the building at night. I stayed still, listening, my heart thudding in the quiet. On the other side of the door, the 2 little ones shifted and the noise faded. But I knew what I had heard. It wasn't playful or weak. It was something older, deeper, hidden inside their small bodies. And for the first time since bringing them home, I felt a chill of uncertainty about what I had let into my life. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The memory of that strange sound from the night still echoed in my head. I made some coffee, sat down at the kitchen table with my phone, and decided I couldn't just keep guessing. I needed to know what exactly I had brought into my home. I opened a search engine and typed in a few vague words at first: kittens with spotted fur and kittens with ear tufts. Dozens of images popped up, most of them of ordinary cats with unusual patterns. But then I scrolled further and froze. The photos staring back at me looked nearly identical to what was sleeping on my balcony. Small, spotted bodies, short tails, and those distinct black tufts of fur on the tips of the ears. Under the picture, the caption read, "Eurasian lynx cubs." I leaned back in my chair, stunned. My mind raced. I clicked through several more links, reading descriptions. Every line added up. The markings, the tufts, the silence, even the low growl I had heard last night. These weren't kittens at all. They were lynx cubs. Wild animals. I set the phone down, rubbed my face, and glanced toward the balcony. The 2 of them were curled together, looking harmless as they dozed in a patch of sunlight. My chest tightened. I thought of the way they had eaten, the way they had followed me without hesitation. Part of me wanted to believe they had chosen me, but another part of me was starting to feel a knot of unease. By noon, I knew I needed more supplies for them anyway. They had eaten nearly everything I had given them, and leaving them hungry wasn't an option. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the pet store across town. The walk there felt heavier than usual, like every step carried the weight of what I had discovered. Inside the store, the air was filled with the smell of hay, grain, and dog treats. I picked out several cans of wet food and a larger bag of dry food. As I set them on the counter, the woman behind the register, a middle-aged lady with sharp eyes, glanced at the stack and smiled. "Got yourself some new kittens?" she asked casually. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, kind of. They followed me home last night. 2 little ones." "That's sweet," she said, scanning the items. "What do they look like?" I don't know why, but I described them honestly. Small, maybe 3 months old. Spotted coats. Their ears have these little black tufts. And their tails, they're short. The woman froze mid-scan and looked at me carefully. "Spots. Tufts on the ears." Her smile vanished. "Sir, those aren't kittens. Those are lynx cubs." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Are you sure? I've worked here for 20 years. Trust me, I'm sure. You need to be careful. They may look small now, but they're wild animals. They don't belong in an apartment." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I muttered a thank you, paid quickly, and left with the bags in my hands. The walk back felt longer, the city sounds sharper, as if every noise reminded me of the reality I couldn't escape. When I opened the door to my apartment, the cubs lifted their heads immediately. Their eyes met mine, wide and steady. I set the food down and just stood there, staring at them in silence. Everything looked different now. The spots on their fur seemed more pronounced, their ears sharper, their movements more controlled. They padded toward me with soft steps, brushing against each other like shadows. For a moment, I almost convinced myself they were still just helpless creatures needing my care. But the truth pressed harder with every heartbeat. These were lynx cubs. Wild, unpredictable, and growing stronger by the day. As they ate the fresh food I laid out, I leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching them carefully. A new thought crept into my mind, one I couldn't ignore. How safe was it to keep them here? What would happen when they got bigger, stronger, and their instincts took over? The question lingered in the air, heavier than anything I had faced so far. The thought wouldn't leave me alone all night. By the time morning light filled the apartment, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit around pretending they were ordinary pets. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number of Dr. Harris, a veterinarian I had known for years. He had treated my old dog before she passed, and I trusted his judgment more than anyone else's. When he picked up, his voice was calm as always. "Hey, it's been a while. What's going on?" I hesitated for a moment before saying, "I need your help. I found 2 animals. At first I thought they were kittens, but I don't think they are. Could you take a look at them?" There was a pause. "What makes you think they're not kittens?" "They have spots, short tails, and tufts on their ears," I explained. "They don't behave like house cats. I think they might be lynx cubs." He drew in a slow breath. "All right, bring them in as soon as you can. I'll clear some time." Getting them into a carrier was the first challenge. I dug out the old pet carrier from my closet, lined it with a towel, and opened the door. The cubs circled it suspiciously, sniffing around, but refused to step inside. I tried coaxing them with food, placing a small portion of wet meat at the back of the carrier. After several minutes, one finally stepped in, followed by the other, but the moment I tried closing the door, they twisted around and hissed. Their growls, deep for such small bodies, rattled me. Eventually, with patience and a steady hand, I managed to shut the latch. Carrying the carrier down the stairs, I could feel the weight shifting as they moved inside. The sound of their claws against the plastic walls sent a shiver through me. I drove across town, every bump in the road reminding me of the wild animals sitting just behind my seat. At the clinic, Dr. Harris was already waiting. He guided me straight into an examination room. The cubs pressed against the back of the carrier, ears flat, eyes wide. I opened the door carefully, and with gentle hands, Harris coaxed them onto the table. He moved slowly, speaking in a soft tone, examining their ears, their coats, their teeth. Finally, he looked at me and nodded. "You were right. These are lynx cubs. About 3 months old, maybe a bit less. They're underweight, but otherwise healthy." I exhaled, a strange mix of relief and dread filling me. So what do? I can't keep them in my apartment, can I? Harris shook his head. It's not safe for you, and it's not right for them. They need proper care and a chance to grow in the right environment. I know people at the Wildlife Service who handle situations like this. I'll make some calls. As he stepped out to contact them, I stayed in the room with the cubs. They were restless, pacing across the table, eyes darting around the room. For a brief moment, one pressed against my arm, its fur warm and surprisingly soft. My heart clenched. Despite everything, I had grown attached to them. Harris returned after a few minutes. They'll call you soon. They'll want to know where you found them. There's a chance their mother is still nearby, but his voice trailed off. But what? I asked. He sighed. If the cubs were following people, it might mean the mother is gone. They wouldn't leave her side otherwise. We'll let the experts check, but prepare yourself. These little ones might be orphans. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his words settle on me. The idea of them losing their mother hit harder than I expected. They were so small, so dependent, and the thought of them being left alone in the wild twisted my stomach. We returned them to the carrier, and I drove back home, the silence heavier than before. Every few minutes I glanced back, watching their eyes glint in the dim light. When I set the carrier down in my apartment, my phone buzzed. It was an unfamiliar number. I answered, and a clear, firm voice introduced themselves from the State Wildlife Service. After asking a few questions, the officer said something that made my chest tighten. We've had reports of a dead lynx not far from your neighborhood. It may have been the mother. If that's the case, these cubs are on their own. I looked at the carrier, at the two pairs of eyes staring back at me, and realized their survival might now depend entirely on what I chose to do next. The next morning, the Wildlife Service called back with clear instructions. They had arranged for me to bring the cubs to a rehabilitation center about an hour outside the city. The thought of parting with them twisted my stomach, but deep down, I knew it was the right thing. My apartment was no place for wild animals, and they needed care I couldn't provide. I packed the carrier again, slipping a soft towel inside for comfort. The cubs resisted less this time, almost as if they sensed the change. They pressed against each other, their eyes steady on me as I carried them downstairs. The drive felt longer than it was. Every time I glanced back, I caught sight of their faces peeking through the grate, silent and watchful. When I pulled into the gravel driveway of the rehabilitation center, a tall wire fence surrounded the property. Signs marked it as a protected facility. Two staff members met me at the entrance, dressed in green jackets with the center's logo. One of them, a woman with kind but firm eyes, introduced herself as Claire. "You must be the one who found the cubs," she said. "Let's take a look at them." Inside the main building, the cubs were placed gently on a padded table. Claire and another worker examined them quickly, checking their eyes, teeth, and paws. "They're in good condition," Claire said, glancing at me. "A bit underweight, but that's normal considering their situation. You did the right thing bringing them here." I nodded, my throat tight. "So what happens now?" "They'll stay with us until they're strong enough to fend for themselves," she explained. "We'll make sure they get proper nutrition and space to develop their instincts. The goal is to prepare them for release back into the wild." As she spoke, one of the cubs wandered closer to me, brushing against my arm before being gently guided back. That simple touch nearly broke me. In just a few days, I had grown attached in ways I hadn't expected. They weren't pets, but they had trusted me, followed me, and accepted my help. Saying goodbye felt heavier than I imagined. Claire must have noticed my hesitation. "It's never easy," she said softly. "But remember, this is what they need. Out there, they'll learn to be lynx again. And thanks to you, they have that chance." I crouched down one last time as the cubs were carried toward their new enclosure. Their eyes followed me, and for a fleeting second, they both reached toward me with small paws, as if reluctant to let go. My chest ached, but I forced myself to smile. "Take care of them," I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. Back in my car, the seat beside me was empty, the carrier folded and silent. The drive home felt lonelier, but also lighter in a strange way. I had done what was right, even if it hurt. Weeks turned into months. Life slowly returned to normal, though I often caught myself glancing at the blanket on my balcony or the empty bowls I hadn't yet put away. Then one afternoon, my phone buzzed with an email from the rehabilitation center. The subject line read, "Update on the cubs." I opened it quickly. Attached was a short video clip taken from a camera trap in the forest. My breath caught as the footage played. A fully grown lynx stepping through tall grass, her spotted coat glistening under the sun. Behind her bounded two young cubs, no longer frail but strong and lively. They followed her closely, their movements confident, their ears tipped with the same black tufts I remembered. Tears blurred my eyes as I replayed the clip over and over. The message beneath it was simple. They're thriving. They're where they belong. I sat back, letting the weight of it all sink in. A random evening trip to the store had led to this. 2 wild lives saved, a mother figure restored in the forest, and a lesson I would never forget. Every small choice we make can ripple further than we imagine. That night, I fell asleep with a quiet sense of peace, knowing I had been part of something far bigger than myself.